pay for it now. That's what my sister-in-law said to me, loud enough for every guest at the table to hear. She didn't ask. She commanded. And just like that, the whole table burst into laughter, me in-laws chuckling as if I were the hired help who'd forgotten her place. My husband looked away. No one stepped in. No one even flinched. But I didn't laugh. I looked around the room. 20 people, all dressed in silk and smugness, waiting for me to pull out my card like I always did. Only this time, I didn't. I stood up slowly, placed both hands on the table, and said just one sentence. The room went quiet. The laughter died. And every eye turned to me. That's the moment everything changed. And if you think this story is about money, you're wrong. This is about dignity. I used to think marrying into the Crawford family meant I was finally part of something solid. They were big on traditions, big on appearances, and even bigger on pretending everything was perfect. I came from a modest home where holidays meant mismatched chairs and secondhand china. To them, perfection meant curated centerpieces and three-course dinner 7 for a Tuesday. When I married Daniel, I told myself I could learn their rhythm. That if I kept quiet, gave enough, smiled at the right moments, they'd eventually stop treating me like an outsider. They never did. The first few times I picked up the check at family dinners, it was subtle. "Oh, Emily, you work in finance, you've probably got this." Or, "You're just so good with numbers, honey." I didn't mind. It felt generous, adult, useful. But then it became expected. When someone forgot their wallet, it was always during a meal I was invited to. When the bill came, it never landed in front of anyone else. And when it did, eyes shifted toward me like it was a joke we all shared, but I wasn't laughing. At first, I rationalized it. I told myself they were just unorganized, or maybe I really was the one best suited to manage these things. Daniel, my husband, would squeeze my hand under the table and whisper, "Thanks, Em, you're amazing." But slowly, his thank yous stopped. And his hand stopped reaching for mine. That's when I realized I wasn't just helping. I was being used. It wasn't just dinners, either. It was birthday gifts, spa packages, hotel reservations, vacation deposits. His sister, Madison, once accidentally booked a weekend in Aspen and added my name to the invoice, texting, "Hope you don't mind, it's easier that way, right?" And I paid. Every single time. I kept thinking if I gave more, they'd see me differently. That maybe the money I spent would earn me something more than polite nods and condescending smiles. Instead, all it earned me was silence when I needed support. Like the night I was promoted to VP, we were all at dinner, and when the announcement popped up online, I looked around the table smiling, expectant. No one said a word. Not Daniel, not his parents, not Madison. It was like the success of a woman in their circle didn't count unless she'd married it or inherited it. That night, I paid the bill again. And I went home with a lump in my throat and a credit card receipt for $380. But I still wasn't ready to walk away. Not yet. Daniel wasn't a bad man. That's the part that made it harder. He was gentle, funny in his quiet way, and he adored his family maybe too much. From the beginning, I knew he'd never raise his voice to them. I just didn't realize how completely he would lower his voice for me. When we moved in together, I noticed the subtle signs. Decisions he deferred to his mother, bank accounts he kept temporarily tied to her for emergency reasons, and the way he always hesitated when I brought up setting clearer boundaries with Madison. He'd rub the back of his neck, sigh, and say, "They're just used to things a certain way." That certain way meant every family gathering revolved around his parents' preferences. If I suggested something different, a new restaurant, a simpler party, I was met with awkward silence or, worse, thin smiles that didn't reach anyone's eyes. And yet I kept showing up. I helped cook. I decorated for their birthdays. I organized spreadsheets for holiday shopping so nobody was forgotten. One Christmas, I stayed up till 3 a.m., wrapping 37 gifts, none of which had my name on the tags. I laughed it off when Madison said, "You're so good at this, like a real little elf." It stung more than I admitted. I bought my mother-in-law a leather handbag she once admired in a magazine. 200, even on sale. She opened it, smiled, and said, "It's a nice imitation," before moving on to the next box. Daniel saw the look on my face. He didn't defend me. He just whispered, "Don't take it personally. She's particular." Particular. That was the word he always used when they excluded me from things. When they posted group photos I wasn't invited to. When they accidentally made brunch reservations for 6 instead of 7. But the worst part wasn't what they did. It was what I allowed. I kept thinking if I endured enough, if I earned enough, paid enough, they'd stop treating me like a temporary guest at their permanent table. I was wrong. Over time, I felt myself shrinking. Not visibly. I still smiled, still brought wine, still carried my gold card in my purse just in case someone forgot. But inside, something in me had begun to erode. My sense of self, my dignity, my voice. Still, I told myself, just make it through the next event. Then decide. That next event? It would be the night everything fell apart. The family party where Madison barked, "Pay for it now." The night the jokes stopped. The night I stood up. But before we get there, you have to understand the cost I had already paid. And why silence was no longer an option. I started keeping track. Not out loud. Not in a spreadsheet, not yet. But in my head, like a mental ledger carved line by line every time someone handed me the bill with a smile. Every time Madison forgot her card. Every time my name was nowhere on the group thank you post, even though I had paid for half the event. At first, it was just a feeling. A sinking weight in my chest, a silent itch behind my ribs that whispered, "This isn't right." But I silenced it. I told myself, this is what family does. Family supports each other. But that wasn't true, was it? Because support goes both ways. I began to notice the imbalance in small, sharp moments, like the time I got the flu and had to cancel brunch with my in-laws. No one checked in. But the next week, when I didn't show up with the custom cupcakes I had promised for my niece's birthday, Madison texted, "Wow, thanks for bailing. Real classy." No, hope you feel better. Just disappointment that I wasn't there to decorate her child's party like I always did for free. There was the vacation to Napa Valley, organized by my mother-in-law, who had accidentally booked one fewer room. Guess who ended up sharing a fold-out couch in the suite while Madison and her husband had a king with a vineyard view? They said I was so chill and easygoing. What they really meant was, I wouldn't complain. I'd never say no. Until I started whispering it to myself. No. It became a mantra, repeated behind every forced smile. No. I don't deserve to be treated like a credit card with legs. No. This isn't how love should feel. No, I will not keep shrinking to make them comfortable. Eventually, the ledger in my head turned real. One night, after paying for yet another dinner Daniel had forgotten to plan for, I opened my laptop and began typing. I created columns: date, event, amount, who benefited. 3 years. 78 events. Over 91, 0. And those were just the receipts I still had. I stared at that number. It didn't even make me angry. It just made me tired. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay beside Daniel, listening to the quiet of our apartment, and realized they didn't love me for who I was. They loved what I gave, and I had given enough. I didn't know what I was going to do yet, but I knew this. The next time they handed me the bill, I wouldn't pick it up. I'd pick me instead. It was supposed to be a celebration. Daniel's parents were renewing their vows 40 years of marriage, a grand dinner party at one of the most expensive restaurants in the city. The invitation arrived in gold-embossed cardstock. Madison texted me a week before. "You're coming, right? Mom expects it to be flawless. Can we count on you for the wine tab again?" No. Hi. No, thank you. Just assumption wrapped in entitlement. I stared at her message for a full minute before replying. Sure. Then I closed my phone, quietly adding another line to the spreadsheet. I dressed in black that night, not out of spite but because I wanted to disappear. To be quiet and watchful, not dazzling. Madison wore red, bold and smug, like she was walking into a coronation. My mother-in-law was dripping in pearls. Daniel adjusted his cufflinks 3 times before we left, nervous energy radiating from him like a boy about to fail a test he never studied for. The restaurant was candlelit and extravagant. White linen, crystal glasses, waitstaff in bow ties. A jazz trio played softly in the corner. The Crawfords had filled 2 long tables with family, friends, and distant connections I didn't even recognize. But no one seemed to notice I was alone at the end of the table, pouring my own water while everyone else laughed in clusters. As the courses arrived, steak, wine, lobster, cakeith, mood swelled, toasts were made, speeches delivered. Madison made sure to name every family member who helped make the event possible. My name was never mentioned, but I had expected that. What I didn't expect was what came next. The waiter arrived with the bill, a small leather folio set discreetly at the center of the table. Madison reached for it first, skimmed the total, and raised an eyebrow dramatically. "Oh wow," she laughed, holding it up like it was part of a magic trick. Who knew love costs so much? She turned to me, handed me the folio, and said it like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Pay for it now." Just like that. Like a command. The laughter around the table echoed instantly. My father-in-law chuckled. My husband looked away. Even my mother-in-law sipped her champagne without flinching. The joke had landed. I was the punchline. But this time, I didn't laugh. I didn't even blink. I picked up my napkin, folded it slowly, and laid it across my plate. Then I stood. The chair scraped back on the marble floor, loud enough to silence half the table. Madison still smirked, as if daring me to make a scene. But I didn't need to raise my voice, because I had brought something more powerful than words. I brought the truth. I didn't pick up the bill. Instead, I reached into my purse and pulled out a thick white envelopion I had sealed myself just that morning. Every finger at the table seemed to pause midair as I held it up, letting the weight of it speak before I did. "You want me to pay?" I said calmly, my voice cutting through the clatter and laughter like a clean blade. "All right, let's talk about what I've already paid." Madison rolled her eyes. "Emily, it was a joke. Lighten up." But no one else was laughing anymore. I slid the envelope across the table to her. "Inside, you'll find every major expense I've covered in the last 3 years. Dinners like this, birthday parties, spa weekends, Napa, flights to Charleston. Your daughter's preschool tuition, yes. I covered half when you said it was a rough month." My mother-in-law's glass froze midair. "I itemized everything," I continued. "Because I wanted to be sure. I wanted to know if I was imagining things. If I was just being dramatic, ungrateful, or selfish like you've all hinted before." I turned to Daniel. "Even you." He stared at me, wide-eyed, pale, speechless. Madison opened the envelope, leafing through the printed spreadsheets page after page after page. "That total," I said, "comes to 97,640.2.18, not counting tonight's dinner." Gasps rippled down the table. One uncle choked on his wine. Someone else muttered, "You're kidding." But I wasn't. I let the silence stretch. No one could pretend anymore. Then I turned to my in-laws, my voice unwavering. "You've treated me like a bank with a dress on. Not a wife, not a daughter-in-law, not family, just someone convenient. And I've let it happen. For too long." My mother-in-law's lips curled. "This is incredibly disrespectful. You're embarrassing yourself." "No," I said, shaking my head. "I'm freeing myself." Madison leaned forward, hissing, "You seriously tracked every dollar?" I smiled. "I did. Because you never noticed the time, the effort, the money. You never once said thank you. You never even asked if I was okay." I reached for the little gift box on the table, the one I had wrapped with care for the occasion. "This was going to be for you," I said to my mother-in-law, "a watch that cost me a weekend's salary. But now, I'm keeping it." I picked up my clutch, straightened my shoulders, and looked around the room one last time. Let this be my final contribution to the Crawford family. I turned to Daniel. I'm done. And whether or not you choose to follow me, I'm walking out of this restaurant with my dignity, and that's more than anyone here ever gave me. Daniel opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. His mother reached for his arm like she always did, always ready to pull him back under her control. But I had already stepped away. I walked toward the exit slowly, not in anger, but in clarity. And as I passed the host stand, I paused. I turned, not to look at them but to speak loud enough for the whole room to hear. By the way, I said, I booked this restaurant for you. The deposit was non-refundable, so technically, you've already used me tonight. Congratulations. Then I left. I didn't cry in the car. I didn't blast music or scream or call a friend. I just drove in silence, letting the glow of streetlights blur through the windshield as if the whole night had been a fever dream. My hands were steady on the wheel, my breathing calm. But something inside me had shifted so profoundly. It was like I had finally stepped out of someone else's life and back into my own. That restaurant door hadn't just closed behind me. It had sealed off years of humiliation I didn't even realize I'd accepted. By the time I reached home, not hours I was exhausted. I peeled off the dress I had chosen so carefully, the heels I had broken in just for tonight, and tossed them into a donation bag. I made myself tea, sat on the floor, and watched the steam curl toward the ceiling like smoke rising from something I had finally burned to the ground. The next morning, the phone calls started. First, Daniel. 6 missed calls. Then a text. Em, please, just talk to me. Then his mother. That was cruel. You embarrassed our entire family. Followed by Madison. Wow, you've always been dramatic, but that was next level. I didn't respond. By noon, Daniel was at my door. I didn't open it. He left a note instead. No apology, just confusion. Hurt. Why didn't you tell me it got this bad? I wanted to laugh. I had told him. With every quiet sigh, every unspoken request for support, every time I paid and he said nothing that had been me telling him. He just hadn't listened. The funny thing is, no one ever asked me why I kept paying. Why I kept showing up. They just assumed I would because I always had. But people break. Even the quiet ones. Especially the quiet ones. That weekend, I deactivated the joint credit card. Transferred the last of my savings to a personal account. Texted my HR department and requested a week off. I needed space. Not just from them but from the version of me that tolerated them. Daniel finally sent one more message. I didn't realize how much you were carrying. I'm sorry. I should have protected you. I stared at the words for a long time. And for the first time in years, I felt nothing but peace. Because this wasn't about whether he was sorry. It was about the fact that I was no longer available to be used, thanked, or forgotten. I had nothing more to give them. And everything left to reclaim for myself. I spent the first week alone. Not in loneliness, but in something softer, something I hadn't felt in a long time. Relief. No one asked me to cover a bill. No one made backhanded comments about how ambitious I was. No one guilt-tripped me into showing up, dressing up, or paying up. I slept in. I made coffee slowly. I walked around the block in leggings and no makeup without worrying that Madison would comment on how I let myself go. I reread old novels and filled the silence with jazz because I liked it, not because it matched a family dinner ambiance. My apartment, which once felt like a waiting room between obligations, began to feel like a home again. I pulled the spreadsheets off my desktop, deleted them. Not because the data didn't matter, but because the accounting was over. The next few weeks unfolded like quiet revolutions. I met up with friends I hadn't seen in months, women who had once said, "You've changed since you married into that family," and I had dismissed them. They were right. We had long dinners filled with laughter, and no pressure to split the check with awkward glances. I remembered what it was like to be around people who didn't expect anything from me, except honesty? Who listened when I spoke? Who didn't make me feel small to feel bigger themselves? I booked a solo weekend in Sedona, hiked alone, slept under starlight, wrote things in a journal I hadn't dared say aloud. I wanted to be accepted so badly, I let myself be erased. I thought sacrifice would earn love. It only earned silence. I was never too much. I was with people who gave too little. When I returned, Daniel had sent one more message. Not a plea, not a guilt trip, just this. I've started therapy. You were right. I let them control everything, including me. It was the first time he had ever said something that didn't center him. I wished him well, but I didn't respond. Because healing doesn't always include reconciliation. Sometimes, it's just the peace of finally choosing yourself. I started a small foundation quietly, anonymous, offering financial literacy coaching to women who feel trapped in relationships where money is power and silence is currency. I didn't tell anyone from the Crawfords. I didn't need their applause. I wasn't building this to prove anything. I was building it because I could. Because finally, all that energy I once gave away was coming home. To me, months passed. The holidays came and went. I didn't get an invitation, not even a card. And for the first time in years, I didn't wait by the phone. I didn't wonder if they'd reach out, apologize, explain. I didn't need them to, because I had stopped hoping to be welcomed and started choosing where I felt whole. Daniel and I signed the divorce papers on a rainy Tuesday. It was quiet, clean, no arguments, no bitterness. Just a long exhale between two people who had finally accepted the truth. We were never equals in his family's eyes, and he was never brave enough to change that. As he handed me the pen, he said, "You were always stronger than all of us." I didn't reply. I just signed my name and slid the folder shut. It was done. Some people called what I did dramatic, others unforgivable, but I never cared what they thought again. Because deep down, I knew they were never really laughing at the jokes. They were laughing at the idea that someone like me would dare speak up. And when I finally did, they didn't know what to do with the silence that followed. But I did. I filled it with new beginnings. I bought a modest home by the water, no marble countertops or fancy lighting, just warm wood floors, a soft couch, and quiet mornings that belonged only to me. I planted herbs on the windowsill. I learned to cook for joy, not performance. I stopped asking, "Will they like this?" and started asking, "Do I?" One afternoon, while walking by the lake, a stranger complimented my earrings. I thanked her, and she smiled. "You look like someone who knows exactly who she is." And for the first time in a long time, I believed it. Not because I had money, not because I had status, but because I had boundaries and the courage to enforce them. I don't know if the Crawfords still talk about me. Maybe they do. Maybe they call me ungrateful, difficult, selfish. But that's okay. Let them tell whatever story helps them sleep. I know the real one. The one where I finally stood up in a room full of people who took me for granted and chose, with steady hands and a clear voice, to leave. Not because I wanted to punish them, but because I finally understood that being the one who always pays doesn't mean you're valued. It just means you're available. And I'm not anymore.